Hi, I'm Madison Ray, the Senior Director of the Center for Practical Federalism at State Policy Network. The Center is a new initiative, and one of the things that we are focusing on is legislative oversight at the state level. Legislative oversight is a critical responsibility of our elected officials at the state level. We also recognize that at any given time, over half of the members of Congress are former state legislators. Because of that, this is an investment not only at the state level, but also for our future elected officials in Congress. Today, I'm joined by Steve Johnson, who is a fellow at the Center for Practical Federalism. Before joining SPN and the Center, Steve served as a state legislator in Michigan, where he was also the chairman of the Michigan House Oversight Committee. Steve conducted critical hearings to hold Governor Whitmer and other agencies accountable during his time as chair. Steve, we're so glad that you're here today, and thank you so much for being a part of our new center.
Thanks for having me here.
I wanted to ask, what motivated you to run for public office?
I served in the U.S. Air Force during the Obama years, a very tumultuous time in government. You had Benghazi, Iraq, Afghanistan, so watching the news very closely. And at that time, you also saw domestically the federal government grow tremendously. And yet you'd hear politicians talk all the time about restoring the 10th Amendment, about cutting the federal government, all that stuff, but they never actually did that. It was all talk. And so when I got out of the Air Force and there was an open seat, I just didn't trust people running for office and figured I'd run myself.
So while you were serving in the legislature and as chair of the House Oversight Committee, what motivated you to take action while you were serving on that committee?
So my first term, I actually served in the Oversight Committee all 3 terms, and the first term I realized it was almost a punishment to be on that committee. We didn't do anything, it wasn't a fundraising committee, very sleepy, but I enjoyed it. The few times we met, we were holding bureaucrats accountable. And the second term, there was a little bit more activity, and then that third term, when I took over as chair, it was right after 2020. There is so much going on with Governor Whitmer, right? You had the COVID shutdown. You just had an incredible growth of the administrative state in Michigan. And I saw that as an opportunity to not just pass legislation, but for us to be active into holding her accountable for her actions. And so that's where we went to work. Our first hearing was on high school sports, of all the things. At that time, professionals could play sports, college athletes could play, but Governor Whitmer put a hold on all high school sports. And so our first hearing, we had high school athletes, parents, coaches, principals come in and talk about how valuable that was and how it just made no sense to say, you can't play, you have to go home by yourself, you can't compete, you can't be athletic. It made no sense. And we highlighted, those voices, and within a couple weeks, the governor changed her mind. And from there, we just kept going. So whether it was the unemployment fraud of over $10 billion, MIOSHA, Michigan's version of OSHA, we had issues where they were going after employers recklessly. And really, we found in a deposition, they had burned documents that were actually going to hurt them. And so we brought them in, holding them accountable. We didn't pass a whole lot of legislation. Governor Whitmer wasn't going to sign that. But what we were able to do is shine a spotlight onto what the bureaucrats were up to.
Why don't we hear more stories like this in state houses across the country?
I think there's a couple different reasons. First off, it's hard work. When you want to pass a bill, it's very simple. You get the votes, you pass it through the House and Senate, you get the governor to sign it, you're done. You're never done with oversight. It's a constant, relentless battle. You're always at work. And then the other thing that we see in states is they're kind of afraid to go against the governor. They view it sometimes, especially if they're the same political party, you're attacking your guy that's in the office. To me, it's never been about that. It's about the bureaucracy. It's holding them accountable. We have to shift the view of the way that legislatures are thinking of, all right, are we just trying to pass laws, or is there more to that? Are we looking to see what's going on within the executive branch? Are we asserting the legislative authority to make sure that the people's voice is heard? Because that's where the people's voice is. It's not through the army of bureaucrats. They're not elected. And so trying to change that perspective, trying to get more legislatures involved in that aspect to say it's not just about passing laws, but it's about holding the administrative state accountable.
Okay, so with those examples that you shared from your time in Michigan, and also just acknowledging, here's why it's not happening in state legislatures. So what can elected officials do to conduct legislative oversight in their state?
It's a great question. First off, you don't have to be on an oversight committee. I think so many people think, oh, I must be on that committee or otherwise I can't do oversight. That's just not true. Every elected official can conduct oversight. You have to realize you have more power as an elected official than you realize. You can subpoena documents a lot of times. Asking questions is really that first step. So often people wonder about things, but they don't actually take that step to say, all right, I'm going to fire off a letter to this administration, to this agency, asking these questions. And that's the first step. It's just realizing you have that power to do that. Start doing that. Don't view your role as I show up and I either vote yes or no on a piece of legislation and then I'm done. Instead, view your role as digging into what's going on. Look at the budget. Look at how they're spending the dollars. Look at the actions that's going on. Look at your governor's executive orders. What are they doing? Look into it and then start asking those questions. And once you start to see that build out, I think then you're going to have legislatures across the nation really holding the executive branch accountable.
Where do you see opportunities if I'm a legislator and I'm not sitting on a legislative oversight committee? As you said, this is a responsibility that legislators have no matter what committee assignment they might have. Where do you see the most opportunity, or where might it be easiest for legislators to engage in this type of work?
I think you have to start with what issues are you passionate about? What committees do you sit on? If you're on the Health Policy Committee, Department of Health and Human Services is usually the largest part of state government. Well, now you have the avenue. If you're on the Education Committee, that's kind of your specialty. Start looking at what's going on in the education realm. Just because you're not on an oversight committee, you're still specializing in some sort of area. You probably got elected to office because you cared about an issue, you're passionate about something. Start there. If you don't know anything about the Department of Transportation, I'm not asking you to delve into that. If you know a lot about a certain area, start there, and then you can build out.
Switching gears a bit, so having heard about your experience and then also what state legislators can do, why SPN and why work for the Center for Practical Federalism?
I think it was last year the Mackinac Center invited me to annual meeting to participate on a panel on oversight. It was a great discussion. Loved meeting the people at annual meeting. And then Tony and yourself, you guys called me later and explained your idea for the Center for Practical Federalism. I loved its mission. I thought it made a lot of sense. There's a lot of people out there talking about doing stuff like this. They love to talk about the 10th Amendment. They like to talk about that, but they're not putting it into tangible steps of what can we actually do. And I think that's where the center is a little bit different, is trying to be very practical, right? Trying to actually put this into practice. And I think it's been frustrating the last few years seeing the political landscape not having the wins that we normally would like to get. We have to start doing things a little bit differently. And I think the center is still geared towards the values we all agree on, but trying to approach it from a different perspective than what we've done the last 20 years.
So through your work with the Center for Practical Federalism, how are you engaging with elected officials?
So, first off, we talk with the think tanks. Example, Wisconsin, they have IRG there, working with them to have discussions with lawmakers and trying to coordinate those efforts to sell this idea to lawmakers. A lot of them like it. If you're at the state level, you generally do have this feeling of the federal government being too large. You want to bring that authority back to the states. But they often don't realize the resources that they have, the tools that they have to do that. And so just kind of encouraging them and letting them know that they can do that, and also reminding them that they have to. That's their job. And it's so easy. They get busy and they forget about that. And so we're working with state think tanks to make this happen. So
Mackinac Center is the state think tank that is in your state of Michigan. You've referenced working with the Institute for Reforming Government, which is a think tank in Wisconsin. How can other think tanks engage with you on legislative oversight or oversight more broadly?
I think every state think tank probably has different issue areas that they're trying to focus on, and try to look into there and say what part of that maybe needs more oversight. Instead of just passing a legislation and checking that box and moving on, are they looking to see, how has their DHHS expanded over time? Have they gotten past their initial scope of mission? And then, give us a call and we'll come in and work with you on how you can, work with the legislature to shine a spotlight on that administration. This doesn't mean that we're against the governor. Sometimes we like some conservative governors around the nation. This is about the bureaucracy that's under them, and a lot of mid-level managers that need to be exposed for how they're not following the wishes of the governor. And so we're happy to work with anyone that is interested in doing that, and we'll do whatever it takes.
At the end of the day, what do you hope will change as a result of this work?
Number one, I want lawmakers to not view their job as just passing legislation. I want them to say, all right, we also need to do oversight. And when that's effective, when the bureaucracy, they're in their government-funded building in the office and they start to think of some new rule or some new law, and someone in that room stops them and says, wait a minute, I don't want to have to get hauled before the legislature and answer for that. I want the bureaucrats to be scared of the legislature. I think that's how you know you're winning. When the administrative state is reined in, when they're afraid to go too far, that's how we know we've won.
So because of all this work that through the Center for Practical Federalism, partnering with state legislators, legislative oversight committees, and of course the State Think Tank Network, what would our country look like with better oversight?
I think hopefully if we're successful in this, number one, you have states looking at the federal government in a much different manner. We're seeing already some states talk about not accepting federal funding. That's huge. We haven't had that in a long time. Starting to have a view of we don't need the federal government, and not only that, but we're going to push back against them when they go too far. That's really what we're trying to do here, is embolden state legislatures to reassert themselves to what they are supposed to do. And so long-term vision is stronger states in a smaller federal government. And I think that can be done if we give the right tools and the right training to the state legislatures.
And just picturing all state legislatures across the country all practicing consistent oversight, what a change that might be to hold those unelected officials accountable just sounds like something really powerful that could help restore and revitalize federalism in our country.
I think it could really change a lot of things. So often we're looking at government as just what are the different laws and just sort of accepting the administrative state and how it is. And this could really change that. This could really change how when there's something, a new rule or a new law, the legislature had an impact on it. It wasn't just something that they went there and they didn't say anything, they didn't speak up as it went through. You know that the people you elected are the ones running the show. No one has that view right now. It feels like a lot of other people are running things. I might not always be happy with how an election turns out, but I want to know that the person who won is the person who's actually deciding these things and not someone that we've never voted on.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing more about your work with the Center for Practical Federalism and a bit more about your background before joining us here.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to get going on this.
And thank you so much to all of our supporters who have made the Center for Practical Federalism a reality. We are excited to continue this very important work, and we look forward to keeping you updated on our progress.